Think for a moment about the people you spend the most time with, about the spaces you go to every day, about the content that enters through your eyes and ears before you have even fully fallen asleep the night before. Now think about this. What if all of that is not just the backdrop of your life, but the main cause of your financial results? What if the environment around you is not just reflecting who you are, but is actively deciding who you can become? Today you are going to discover something that, once seen, can never be ignored again. How the environment around you, the people, the spaces, the conversations, the content you consume, and even the habitual thoughts you maintain, is silently writing the script of your financial reality. Not in an abstract or metaphorical way. In concrete, measurable, and completely transformable ways from the moment they become visible. And it is exactly this visibility that this video is going to give you. Before we continue, tell us in the comments, how old are you? We would love to know who is here on this journey of consciousness and prosperity. And if you have not subscribed to the channel yet, do it now and turn on the notification bell, because each video here is built to be exactly the kind of environment that expands rather than contracts. Each person who subscribes helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and every subscriber is part of this team that is consciously choosing to grow. Stay until the end of this video, because we have prepared a special exercise for you, the Quantum Environment Audit, a simple and powerful practice that will help you identify what in your environment is expanding you and what is contracting you, and to make the first concrete decision to start redesigning that environment starting today. Because once you see how your environment controls your money, you really cannot stop seeing it. There is something that most people never stop to observe, even though it is right in front of them every single day. The environment around us is not just a passive backdrop where life happens. It is an active reflection, almost literal, of the inner state of the person who inhabits it. The objects that surround a person, the spaces they frequent, the voices they hear regularly, none of this arrived there by accident. It arrived as a consequence of choices made from an identity, and that identity, more than any financial planning, is what determines what keeps arriving. Think about the environment of someone who deeply believes that money is scarce and hard to come by. It is probably an environment of containment, where nothing is renewed because it is not the right time, where the space reflects a survival mentality instead of expansion. Now think about the environment of someone who, even without having much, treats what they have with care, organizes their spaces with intention, surrounds themselves with references that inspire growth. These two environments communicate completely different frequencies, not just to those who visit, but mainly to the person who lives inside them every single day. What behavioral neuroscience confirms, and what traditions of wisdom have been teaching for centuries, is that the environment shapes behavior far more than willpower alone ever could. James Clear explains in Atomic Habits that we are much more a product of our environments than of our isolated determination. When the environment is aligned with the identity one wishes to build, the right behaviors happen almost naturally, without excessive effort. When the environment contradicts that identity, every step forward requires an enormous cost of energy that could instead be directed toward real growth. And what makes this pattern even more revealing is that most people have never realized they are being shaped by the environment they created, instead of creating an environment that shapes them. This inversion, as simple as it seems, is what separates those who live in constant expansion from those who remain at the same level for years. And understanding this completely changes the way someone looks at the space around them, starting now. There is a statistic that has been circulating for decades in studies on human behavior and prosperity, and that, no matter how many times people hear it, is rarely applied with the seriousness it deserves. A person's income tends to approach the average of the 5 people they spend the most time with. Not because it is a magic law, but because the people around them silently define what is normal, what is possible, what is acceptable, and what is too ambitious. And this collective sense of normality operates as an invisible ceiling that most people can never see, precisely because they are inside it. The mechanism behind this is deeper than it seems. It is not just about direct influence, about someone saying, "That is impossible," or "You are dreaming too big." It is about something much more subtle. The unconscious calibration that happens when a person spends enough time with others who have a certain level of belief, financial vocabulary, ambition, and tolerance for risk. These calibrations happen in hallway conversations, in comments about someone else's salary, in reactions when someone talks about a bigger dream. And each one of them, individually invisible, keeps adjusting the internal thermostat of what seems reasonable to want. The problem is not that the people around them are ill-intentioned. In most cases, they are loved ones, family, old friends, coworkers. But love and limitation can coexist in the same relationship. Someone can love you deeply and at the same time have such a low financial ceiling that any conversation about real growth sounds like naivety or arrogance. And when this happens repeatedly, the person who is trying to grow starts, without realizing it, to shrink their ambitions to fit the space the environment allows. Share this video with someone you feel is being limited by the environment around them, because sometimes the biggest shift begins when someone shows us the ceiling we were not seeing. And the question that remains, after understanding this, is not how to radically cut people out of life. It is something much more sophisticated and much more powerful than that. It is understanding how to intentionally expand the human environment, and what happens to the financial ceiling when that expansion truly begins. There is a feeling that most people have already experienced, but rarely stop to name. It is that lightness that arises when entering certain spaces, when participating in certain conversations, when spending time with certain people. A kind of inner expansion, as if the field of possibilities around you became larger just by being there. And there is also the opposite, that subtle heaviness that appears in certain environments, that feeling that the air became denser, that thoughts became heavier, that available energy decreased for no apparent reason. These feelings are not imagination. They are real data about the environment one is in. Environments that expand have recognizable characteristics, even if not always obvious. They are spaces where growth is treated as natural, where the achievements of others are celebrated instead of diminished, where conversations frequently touch on possibilities, on learning, on new perspectives. They are environments where making mistakes is seen as part of the process, where asking for help is a sign of intelligence and not weakness, where everyday vocabulary reflects a healthy relationship with money, with work, and with prosperity. In these environments, growing requires no justification. It is simply what naturally happens when one stays long enough. Environments that contract operate with equal consistency, but in the opposite direction. They are spaces where gossip replaces vision, where cynicism is disguised as realism, where the achievements of others generate discomfort instead of inspiration. They are environments where talking about money is taboo or cause for judgment, where big dreams are met with automatic skepticism, where the collective energy gravitates around problems instead of solutions. Like this video, if you have ever felt the difference between entering an environment that expands you and leaving one that contracts you, because recognizing that difference is the first step toward consciously choosing where to invest your presence. What makes this distinction so important for prosperity is that no financial strategy, no manifestation technique, and no spiritual practice can compete in the long run with the environment where a person spends most of their time. The environment always wins. And understanding this naturally leads to the next question. What to do when the limiting environment is not easy to change, when it is intertwined with important relationships, with real obligations, with life as it is? There is a very common narrative about people who made big changes in their lives, who moved to a new city, changed jobs, distanced themselves from relationships that no longer served them, and who later described these changes as the most important turning points in their financial and personal journey. What stands out in these stories is not the change itself, but the fact that in most cases the person resisted for a long time before acting. Because changing environments requires facing something that goes far beyond logistics. It requires questioning whether the current environment, as familiar as it may be, is still serving the growth one desires. The resistance to these changes is rarely laziness or lack of courage. It is something much deeper, the attachment to the security of the familiar. The human brain was programmed to treat the familiar as safe, even when the familiar is limiting. A small town may represent comfort and belonging, but it may also represent a collective ceiling of possibilities that has never been questioned. A stable job may represent financial security, but it may also represent an environment where growing beyond a certain point is seen as a threat. An old relationship may represent genuine affection, but it may also represent an energy that constantly pulls back toward who one was, instead of sustaining who one is becoming. This does not mean that every change of environment is necessary or that relationships and places should be discarded at the first sign of discomfort. It means there is an important difference between staying in an environment by conscious choice and staying out of fear of leaving. The first posture is one of power. The second is one of imprisonment, even if it is a comfortable prison. Joe Dispenza talks in Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself about how the physical and social environment is constantly activating the same neural circuits, the same emotions, the same behavioral patterns, and that sometimes a change of environment is the most powerful trigger for internal change that no isolated practice has managed to produce. If you are subscribed to the channel, turn on the notification bell right now, because each video here is exactly that kind of trigger for a new perspective. And what makes this idea even more powerful is that changing environments does not always have to mean a dramatic rupture. Sometimes it begins with something much smaller, something that most people have never considered as an act of prosperity, but that has the power to reorganize the entire frequency of the space around them. And that is exactly what will be explored next. There is an ancient practice originating in China called feng shui that, for a long time, was treated in the Western world as superstition or baseless mysticism. But what environmental psychology researchers have been confirming in recent decades is that the physical environment around a person affects their mental, emotional, and behavioral state in ways much deeper than most people imagine. Clutter, for example, is not just aesthetically unpleasant. It creates a constant cognitive load, a background noise that consumes mental energy without the person realizing it, leaving fewer resources available for creativity, decision-making, and directed action. Think about the impact of working or living in a space cluttered with objects that no longer have a purpose, with drawers full of things that are never used, with environments that communicate stagnation instead of flow. Every unnecessary object occupying space is, on some level, communicating a message. Things stop here, nothing flows here, there is no room for the new to enter. And this message, received repeatedly by the nervous system of the person who inhabits that space, keeps calibrating the inner frequency in the direction of contraction instead of expansion. Not because objects have magical power, but because the physical environment is a direct extension of the mental and emotional state of the person who created it. The opposite is also true. Organized, clean, and intentionally composed spaces communicate flow, clarity, and possibility. People who build physical environments that reflect who they wish to become, who place in their spaces references of prosperity, of growth, of beauty, and of intention, are constantly receiving from the environment a confirmation of the identity they are building. It is not a coincidence that many people report significant changes in their energy and productivity after deeply reorganizing their physical spaces. Write in the comments right now, how old are you? I want to know who is here on this journey of transforming the environment and prosperity. What this means in practice goes far beyond a cleaning session or an aesthetic reorganization. It means looking at the physical environment with a new question. Does this space reflect who I am or who I want to be? And the honest answer to that question often reveals something that has been operating silently for years, shaping decisions and frequencies without any awareness of it. And this level of awareness prepares the ground for understanding something even more powerful about the invisible environment that no one sees but everyone feels. There is a type of programming that happens so naturally and so constantly that most people never realize they are being programmed. It does not happen in dramatic moments. It does not come from big events or from words said with the intention of limiting. It happens in everyday conversations, in those apparently insignificant exchanges that fill anyone's daily life. The comment at the lunch table about how rich people are all the same. The recurring joke about how money does not grow on trees. The phrase repeated in families that we were not born to be rich. Each of these expressions, heard frequently enough, gets deposited in the subconscious as truth. What makes this process so powerful is exactly its invisibility. When someone reads a book containing a limiting belief, they have the option to question it, to refute it, to create critical distance. But when a belief arrives wrapped in affection, in humor, in conversations with loved ones, the critical filter lowers its guard. The subconscious does not distinguish between information said with the intention of programming and information said casually in a late afternoon conversation. It registers the emotional frequency behind the message and files it as a reference for how the world works. And these references, accumulated over years, form the invisible foundation on which all financial decisions are made. This means that the invisible crowd around a person, formed by the voices they hear most frequently, has a programming power that rivals any other influence in their financial life. Not because these voices are bad, but because they are constant. And consistency, in the field of mental programming, is the most determining factor. Share this video with someone you feel is being limited by the conversations in the environment around them, because sometimes the biggest shift begins when someone realizes where the voices they are hearing inside their own head are coming from. And the good news, which completely transforms this understanding from something disturbing into something liberating, is that this programming can be rewritten. Not overnight, not without effort, but with a clarity and intentionality that begin exactly at the moment one realizes what has been happening. And it is exactly this clarity that will open the next level of this conversation. One of the most consistent characteristics among people who have built real prosperity, regardless of the field, the country, or the cultural context, is that they rarely let the environment around them happen by chance. They make deliberate choices about who they spend time with, what content they consume, what spaces they frequent, what conversations they allow into their lives. Not because they are cold or calculating in their relationships, but because they understood something fundamental. The environment is one of the most powerful assets that exists, and just like any asset, it needs to be managed with intention to produce the desired results. This intentionality manifests in very concrete ways in the daily lives of these people. They choose the books they read based on who they want to become, not just on what is popular. They participate in groups, communities, and events where the level of conversation and ambition is consistently higher than that of their environment of origin. They create routines and rituals that daily build the internal state necessary for the decisions they wish to make. And they periodically review the environment around them with an honest question. Is this still serving the growth I am seeking? Each of these behaviors seems simple in isolation, but combined over time they produce an environment so aligned with prosperity that it begins to flow almost naturally. If you are subscribed to the channel and turn on the notification bell, you are already doing exactly this, intentionally choosing an environment of consciousness and growth. What separates this approach from the majority is a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of waiting for external circumstances to improve before building a better environment, these people build the environment first, knowing that external circumstances will follow. It is the same logic that appeared in previous videos about identity and generosity. Internal transformation precedes the external, and the environment is one of the most powerful tools for accelerating that internal transformation in a consistent and lasting way. And what makes this intentional construction even more accessible than it seems is that it does not require extraordinary resources to begin. It requires something much simpler and much more available than money or special connections. It requires a decision, followed by a small and concrete action, that will reveal something surprising about the speed with which an environment can begin to change when the intention behind it is genuine. There is a form of environment that most people never consider when thinking about prosperity, but that occupies more hours of the day than any other physical or social environment. It is the digital environment, the constant flow of content that enters through the phone screen, the computer, the television, the headphones. News, videos, podcasts, social media, series, music. None of this is neutral entertainment. It is active, constant, and cumulative programming that silently shapes the way a person sees the world, money, possibilities, and themselves. And most people have never stopped to ask the most important question about this flow. What is this content building inside me? The algorithm of digital platforms was designed to maximize attention time, not to maximize the well-being or growth of those who use them. This means that, without conscious intention, the content that arrives tends to be the kind that generates the most emotional reaction, frequently fear, indignation, comparison, and anxiety. And when a person spends hours per day immersed in this type of content, They are constantly activating in their nervous system states that are the exact opposite of what attracts prosperity. Because abundance flows in states of trust, creativity, and expansion, not in states of contraction, fear, and scarcity. Like this video, if you have ever noticed that you leave certain social media feeling less, not more, than when you entered. The good news is that this digital environment can be redesigned with the same intentionality as any other environment. It means making conscious choices about what enters the feed, about which voices deserve regular space in your mind, about what kind of content you will consume before going to sleep and right after waking up, which are the moments when the subconscious is most receptive and most vulnerable to programming. It means treating the digital environment not as a pastime, but as one of the most powerful inputs that shapes your financial frequency daily. Greg Braden talks in The Divine Matrix about how the field around a person is constantly influenced by the emotional states they cultivate, and consumed content is one of the greatest generators of these states. And when one begins to treat the digital environment with this seriousness, something interesting starts to happen. The mental space that was previously occupied by noise begins to free itself for something much more valuable. The most powerful environment of all, one that no digital platform can create or destroy, and that most people have not yet learned to consciously cultivate. After everything explored so far about the physical environment, the social environment, the digital environment, the time has come to talk about the environment that all the others merely reflect. The internal environment, the set of habitual thoughts, recurring narratives, repeated mental images, internal dialogues that a person maintains with themselves throughout the day. This invisible environment, which no one around can see but which the person inhabits 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is the most determining of all. Because all other environments can be changed. But if the internal environment remains the same, external results tend to remain the same as well. Andrew Newberg, a neuroscientist who researches the relationship between the brain, spirituality, and behavior, demonstrated in his studies that repeated thoughts literally create neural pathways that become increasingly automatic over time. A thought thought once is just a thought. A thought thought 1,000 times begins to become a conviction. And convictions, as explored in previous videos, are what shape identity, and identity is what shapes financial reality. This means that a person's habitual inner dialogue, the one that happens between commitments, in moments of silence, before sleeping, upon waking, is literally the daily construction of the reality they will find out there. Write in the comments right now, "I build my environment," because declaring this publicly is already a first gesture of conscious construction of the internal environment. The internal environment of scarcity has a very specific and recognizable texture. It is that constant background of worry about money, that voice that calculates risks before any opportunity, that narrative of what if it does not work out that appears automatically in the face of any possibility of growth. And most importantly, this internal environment is not responding to external reality. It is creating external reality. Because what a person expects to find, with enough emotion and enough repetition, is exactly what their nervous system will organize behaviors to produce, even unconsciously. Building an internal environment of abundance is not about superficial positive thinking. It is not about ignoring real challenges or pretending everything is fine when it is not. It is about choosing, with consistency and intentionality, what kind of internal conversation will occupy the most valuable mental space that exists. And this choice, made repeatedly, begins to reorganize not just the thoughts, but the decisions, the actions, and eventually the results. And it is exactly this understanding that prepares the ground for the most concrete and most transformative step of everything explored so far. Everything explored so far converges toward a single practical truth. The environment is not something that simply happens around a person. It is something that can and should be built with intention, layer by layer, decision by decision, until the space around reflects not who one is today, but who one is choosing to become. And what prevents most people from doing this is not lack of resources, not lack of information, and not lack of willpower. It is the absence of a clear, concrete, and immediately possible first step that breaks the pattern of the current environment and signals to the universe and to the nervous system itself that something is changing. This first step rarely needs to be big. In fact, the most powerful first steps are almost always the smallest, because they encounter the least internal resistance and, for that reason, actually happen. It could be reorganizing a single corner of the physical space with intention. It could be silencing a source of content that consistently contracts instead of expands. It could be starting a different conversation with someone in the close circle. It could be including in the daily routine a voice, a book, an audio, a community that raises the level of the internal environment. Each of these gestures, however small it may seem, is communicating something powerful. I am actively choosing the environment that shapes me, instead of letting the environment passively shape me. What makes this first step so significant is that it does not need to transform everything at once. It just needs to create a crack in the current pattern, a small space where the new can begin to enter. Because environments do not change all at once. They change in layers, through accumulated choices that gradually replace the old with the new. And each layer removed from the limiting environment is a layer added to the expanding environment. Share this video with someone you feel is stuck in an environment that no longer reflects who they are. Because sometimes the biggest change begins when someone shows us that the environment can be chosen. And the invitation that remains after everything that has been said is simple and profound at the same time. Look around right now. Look at the spaces, the voices, the content, the habitual thoughts that make up your daily environment. And ask honestly, is this taking me toward who I want to be, or is it keeping me where I already am? Because the answer to that question, asked with genuine honesty, is the beginning of the most important redesign someone can make on the journey toward conscious prosperity. And this redesign begins now, with the exercise that follows. Before closing this video, it is time to turn everything you heard into something concrete and immediately applicable. Because understanding that the environment shapes prosperity is one thing. Looking honestly at your own environment and making a conscious decision about it is completely different. This exercise takes less than 15 minutes, but done with genuine honesty, it can reveal something that has been operating silently in your financial life for years, perhaps decades. The first thing you are going to do is take a piece of paper and a pen and draw 4 simple columns. In the first column, write physical environment. In the second, social environment. In the third, digital environment. In the fourth, internal environment. Now, in each column, write honestly one answer to this question. What in this environment is expanding me and what is contracting me? It does not need to be a long list. It can be just 1 or 2 things in each column. What matters is honesty, not quantity. Then look at everything you wrote in the contraction column across all 4 environments and choose just one thing. One single thing that you can start to change today. It could be silencing a profile that consistently makes you feel smaller. It could be reorganizing a corner of your physical space. It could be replacing a recurring conversation with a reading that expands you. It could be identifying a habitual thought and consciously choosing a different narrative to replace it. The size of the change does not matter. What matters is that it happens today, because today is the only moment in which any environment can begin to be redesigned. Finally, at the end of the day, before going to sleep, take a moment to observe how you felt after making this first change. Do not look for immediate external results. Look for the inner feeling of someone who is, for the first time or once again, consciously choosing the environment that will shape their prosperity. Because this feeling, cultivated with consistency, is what transforms an isolated exercise into a new way of living. This is your quantum environment audit, and you can repeat it every week, auditing and refining each layer of the environment around you, building step by step the space that will take you to the next level. You made it to the end, and that already says something about the kind of environment you are choosing for yourself. The person who lets the environment happen by chance does not make it to the end of a video like this one. You made it because something in you already knew, even before you started watching, that the space around you matters, that the voices you hear matter, that the content you consume matters. And now you have something that most people will never have. The clear awareness of how all of this is shaping, silently and continuously, your financial reality. What was explored today is not abstract theory about spirituality and prosperity. It is a deep and practical understanding of how the environment operates as the greatest invisible programmer of anyone's financial life. You understood that the environment is a mirror of financial identity. You saw how the people around you silently define your financial ceiling. You discovered the difference between environments that expand and environments that contract. You understood why changing cities, jobs, or relationships can be an act of prosperity. You understood how the physical environment and clutter influence your financial frequency. You saw how everyday conversations program beliefs about money. You learned why prosperous people build environments intentionally. You realized how the content consumed daily shapes your reality. And you discovered that the internal environment is the most powerful of all. The question that remains is not, how do I improve my financial environment? The question that transforms is, what environment do I choose to build, starting now, knowing what I know? Because prosperity does not happen in just any environment. It flourishes in environments built with intention, cultivated with consistency, and inhabited with consciousness. And the construction of this environment begins with a choice, made now, that the space around you will reflect not who you were, but who you are becoming. Share this video with someone you feel is stuck in an environment that no longer reflects who they are. Because sometimes the biggest shift begins when someone shows us that the environment can be chosen. If this content touched something in you, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and continue this journey with Kai and Lyra. Because in the next video, we are going to reveal something that most people have never connected with prosperity. How unfinished projects are creating a silent leak in your universal bank account, and why finishing what you started may be one of the most powerful financial acts you have ever done. See you there.